Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I am Julie Holland, president of the Friends of the Institute. This lecture is part of a series sponsored by Friends of the Institute and made possible through the generous support of the Mark and Mary Goff Fiterman Fund. We are so pleased to welcome Rohan Preston as our speaker today. I have a few announcements I want to make, and I'll refer you to this slide. We have some wonderful events coming up. We have the Centennial Luncheon on April 14th, and that's after the Patrick Noon lecture. And we have Art in Bloom. It's upon us. And if you click on our website, you'll find everything Friends. There are details and ticketing there. And there's also in blue our office phone number. I also want to remind anyone, if they haven't done so, please renew your membership. This is a great year to be a friend. All members will receive a beautiful centennial book this year, and you will also be listed in our new member directory. Okay, now I'm going to introduce Kristen Prestegard, and she will in turn introduce our speaker. Kristen is part of the leadership team at MIA. She is the Chief Audience Officer. As such, she oversees the Audience Engagement Division. This includes marketing, public relations, design and editorial, social media, and visitor experience. Her leadership has directly led to MIA's doubled attendance over the last 10 years. And under her leadership, she was able to pivot during COVID and reach our audiences virtually. It is so great to have Kristen's office right next to the Friends office. She is so supportive of the Friends, and her enthusiasm is contagious. So please join me welcoming Kristen to the stage.
Thank you. Julie's not kidding. She does pop in and advocates for the Friends regularly and pays us back with treats regularly. We've had such a nice chat this morning with Rohan, and I'm personally really excited to hear about this lecture. As you probably know, he spent his childhood in Jamaica, adolescence in New York, earning an English degree at Yale, and has served on the Pulitzer Surprise Jury for Drama. He's been at the Star Tribune since 1998. You're like, did I not know that? When I read Rohan's work, what I really enjoy about it is there's always a gravitas, a national lens, but with that local Star Tribune really mark of care with it. We were saying that it's been kind of a roller coaster for museums the last 2 years. It's been a roller coaster for everyone. But when I was thinking about, so MIA, we've opened and we've closed, and when I was looking at your past stories, I was thinking, gosh, almost half of them had to be about a pivot, a closure, a start or a stop, and more so than ever. So we're so happy to be back in person and to just hear about your background, and grateful for you to spend some time with us today. So welcome.
Good morning. So I am honored to be here. I want to thank Julie. I want to thank Helen. I want to thank all the members of the Friends. I want to thank Katie, your leader. I want to thank all of you. This has been a period for all of us with the crucibles of the pandemic and the social justice reckoning and everything else. It has been really quite remarkable. So I'm honored to be here. I love the Institute. I love walking into this temple of art and feeling that grandeur, and hearing your steps echo as you look here and you look there. It's just beautiful. So thank you all. There's a meme on TikTok where someone asked a person, It's usually a woman, but there are some men being asked as well. Do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Do you have a significant other? And the person usually just pauses forlornly, then answers, yes. Is he or she's in another nation? What nation? Imagination. So the funny thing is, right? That's where I spend a lot of my life. As someone who loves to shovel snow and to mow the lawn and to garden, I get a lot of time to be fallow and to have my imagination work for me. I cherish this time because I live as a writer and a critic, and it's vitally important just to have that opportunity to chew things over. I work in a profession that works on a lot of deadlines, and although I've been at it now for more than 3 decades, a deadline is a deadline is a deadline. There's no escaping that stress, but the joys and the rewards are too numerous to count. I get to provide a service to our community, one that helps us shape the story of this community and our nation. And I also get to live in my imagination. So the work I do involves critiquing shows from small theaters to Broadway, from theatrical experiments to blockbuster musicals. And the gamut often means meeting artists in their fancies and dreams, in their rapture and disappointments. Their works as writers, as actors, directors, and designers are offerings, and I, as an audience member, am like a congregant at church, called to appreciate something that has come from a place of mystery and sometimes genius, something that they hope and trust will touch the heart and the mind and the spirit. I write for a living, and in the past 24 years, it's been at the Star Tribune and mostly about theater, but I also write about architecture as well and books. I occasionally do commentaries when George Floyd was killed. This is a moment for commentary, although I've been too out of sorts about the killing of Amir Locke, a 22-year-old who was asleep and clearly afraid, sleeping with a gun. There must have been a lot of trauma there. Anyway, my work offers sanctuary and solace. Again, I live in the imagination and I meet artists there. I see design sets that are fancy and may cost $1 million for Broadway shows, like recently for Frozen that came through the Twin Cities. Sometimes the design is all lights and casting shadows, or simple chairs arranged and rearranged. We are asked to meet the artists with our imagination to fulfill their vision. Sometimes the set is like a shrine, as is the case at Redwood, which is a new play up at the Jungle Theater, and it's beautiful. Please go see it. The scenography is a setting where people play out their lives. And here's a funny thing. I can read all the subtleties of the world on stage, but in real life, I sometimes miss a whole lot. I'm not saying that I'm a dummy, but I do. And I'm really thankful in those moments that I'm married to Angela Shannon Preston, who's a poet and playwright, because she's able to help me see as well the way a director helps an actor see on stage. I was asked in a way to talk about myself and my work, and that's not something I do often. I write in the third person. I was born before social media and the cell phone, when people had quaint notions of privacy, of being bashful, of not bragging about yourself or telling people what you ate for lunch or dinner. So I appreciate this opportunity to think about my work and life. I'm a man made of words. A mortal coil, yes, this fallible flesh, these brittle bones, but also of words. Words that fell over a Christmas 1966 baby in a palimpsest of prayers, in ululation and cooing and joy. The fervent pleas of the righteous availeth much. My mother and grandmothers and aunts and many of their friends in Preston Hill breathed grace onto this boy, who they said was special, not just because he was born the day of a savior, but because I favored, that is, I look like my great-grandfather, Moss Claudy is what they called him. A kind man who carried treats wherever he went. Claude Holmes was much beloved in our community in Northeast Jamaica. And here I came as he was ailing. I was a dead stamp of him, come to bring his spirit anew. Blessed be, blessed be. I'm made of words that carried on the wind like a kite, skipping a country boy along the ground. These words pulled me through school, through rote learning passed on from the British colonial to who in turn had gotten it from the Romans, who in turn had gotten it from the Greek and the Egyptians, and so on and so on. I had a good memory and a facility with reading. I could recite poems and proverbs, including those of a fellow who was a favorite of my family, especially my father and grandfather, and that is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. In the ladder of St. Augustine, he wrote, "The heights that great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards through the night." Now I should do a pause here and say that if you're from the Caribbean, if you're from Jamaica, you know that, right? Everyone knows this. This is something that's drilled into you about ambition and about work ethic. And so this was a mantra for my parents, and especially for my father. I had no idea that Longfellow, whose spirit and poetry would be suffused here in Minnesota, in Hiawatha, and all over, that I would be connected unawares, that I'd be carried on the threads of these lines of poetry from rural Jamaica to Minneapolis. I had no idea. The son of a teacher, mother, and an accountant father is liable to have some home advantages. I learned early to read, the gift that can be used to unlock mysteries. So after my parents left my younger sister and I in the care of our grandparents while they flew to New York to establish a beachhead in the early 1970s, my sister and I would hold a cracked Bible around a kerosene lamp with a shade that said "Home, Sweet Home," and read to my maternal grandparents. They had not much formal education. My grandmother, Gloria Mercedes Folks, who we called Mama, was a seamstress, copying things out of magazines and making them. My grandfather, James Sylvester Folks, her husband, who we called Papa, was an insatiable autodidact. He loved to learn and was a Renaissance man in the 19th century mold. He had taught himself to read, and he would do the best he could from books. He liked to make things like musical instruments. He made a saxophone. He made a guitar, which he liked to play. He was a botanist. His most famous experiment was a multi-citrus tree that we had in the front yard. It bore oranges and lemons and tangerines, one tree. So today, my wife and I have two girls. And so before our first daughter, and they're now, one is 19, the other is mid-20s, almost mid-20s. Before they were born, I started a little project of crafting poems and vignettes about my grandparents and family members. So here's a word picture of my grandfather. He kept bees in the back, and the poem is called "The Honey Knot." To most eyes, he was just a man out back, weightless in a bubble suit, floating past multi-citrus plants that he had made bear sundry fruit, orange, lemons, tangerines, far out past other grafted trees. See him feeling in the smoke, slow hands in the passion of bees, fingering for his honeypot like some slow motion lunar ace. Yes, he could have been an astronaut signing on from an edge of space. But ordinary eyes may not see how Papa conducted his astral tune. He was no Neil Armstrong, but he brought us manna from the moon. Thank you. So I left Jamaica at 12 for New York, but those 12 years that I had there were indelible, and they left an imprint on me, not just in terms of the foods, but also, and the music, but also in my disposition and my love of learning, my love of language. I love to learn, and I've never learned my limitations. Again, I'm a fool. You see, I was a doted on child. Yes, I can admit it now. I've been spoiled. I had fancy gifts, and like in the early 1970s, when I was in grade school, my parents sent me a toy helicopter. It was probably the best gift I've ever had in my life, because really, I got to fly that thing, and I was the envy of all my friends, and I let all of them play with it. I was a cosseted child, and I'm thankful for the love of family. In fact, that love was so strong and protective that I probably felt younger than I was in terms of my actual age. So when I talk about family, this is just an aside, when I talk about my grandparents, I'm mostly talking about my mother's side. My father's side lived about 4 miles away in a place called Sandside, nearer to Port Maria, which is the capital of St. Mary, one of Jamaica's 14 parishes. And I really didn't know them. There was a schism in my family, and I don't know what caused the schism, but it's something that happened. And so when my parents left, I was left with my maternal grandparents. And this structure, my father had built, and mother had built a beautiful modern house near my father's parents, and this structure was probably, middle class, probably 2,000 square feet or more. I have some memories of being in there, and my memories are mostly of cleaning fluids, because there are always people coming in to clean and do things. And so, and I have some memories too of being taught and being read to. The place was spotless. So that's kind of wonderful, but when you're a kid, you want it to be a little messy. So my parents also had a beach house in a place called Galena on the North Coast, and I have some vague memories of that. So it's only recently that I've had this sense of what they must have gone through when they moved to New York to basically start their lives over, and to give up sort of like the structure and the support that they have. I'm so grateful for that. And my dad would often say, we moved here for your education. So I'm grateful for that, but I can see how they, what they gave up. Anyway, my sister and I lived in Preston Hill, a community of probably 300 folks. It's in the northeast of the country, much of it rural, independent in agriculture and trade and light industry. In our little community from which I took my name, all the families owned their homes and land, and it consisted of just 2 streets, Longley Road, the main artery, which had shops and school and churches and the majority of homes, and then our little home, which was called Burnside. And this street overlooked the water. The water was probably 2 miles away, but it's high up. So the water looked like a painting all the time. You would see sailboats coming along. You see the whitecaps going. It was always a painting. When it rained, it was a layer cake. You had brown from the runoff. You had a kind of a bluish green layer. You had an azure layer, and you had a deep blue. All like that. And this was our backyard. This was our front yard. This was our everything. It was gorgeous, but you don't know it when you're in it. You just go on. So I say all of this because I grew up in a place of beauty and with big dreams of my own and big dreams that were given to me. I was naive enough, some might even say foolish enough, to not know otherwise. And so when I immigrated to New York in 1978, July 1979, I'm sorry, it was a shock. But then 10 years later, in June 1989, I graduated from Yale. It looks pretty easy. It looks pretty fun. It was not, but I had the good graces of all teachers who guided me, like my high school English teacher, Carmine Giordano, who entered my poems into the New York City Poetry Contest without my knowledge or permission. And I won. And I won first place, and we went to the Gramercy Club. I was given a big check, and Broadway actors read my works. It was unrecognizable because I did not know who had written. They injected so much into it. And, you know, I think this was 1984. I think that set me going. And I've since written plays and other works, and I can hear voices, partly because of that experience, you know. So when people ask me, how did you become a critic? I usually give a glib answer, and it's true, and it also happens to be something that minimizes it a little bit. I love music, dance, theater, and opera, all the performing arts, visual arts, literary arts. And when I was a student at John Dewey High School, I believe in 10th grade, my English teacher, Stanley Bloomfield, a man who has a puckish, jolly appearance, giving spirit, and was a faculty advisor for the literary publication I edited, said to me, I know that you love these things. I'm not making any statements about whether or not you can afford them. But if you want to get into shows for free, you could either usher or become a critic. That changed my life. I didn't know it at the time. You know, and it's true. I didn't know it at the time. It changed my life because, like everyone else, every good immigrant child, I'm going to be a lawyer or a doctor, right? You know, I don't know if that's going to happen, but ask my parents and they'll tell you, lawyer or doctor. There weren't many choices. So I'm like, how does that happen still, you know? How do you do that? Before my sister and I joined my parents in New York, everyone told us that we would not be going outside to play or to hang out. You see, my parents were terrified in New York in the 70s. They were also working 2 jobs and going to school to redo their education. So that was the reason why we were going to be, as I regarded it, prisoners. But there was one grace note in all of that, and that is, they said that we could do things that were purposeful. We could go to the library, we could go to the museum, we could go to concerts, we could do all of that. Guess who overindulged? And from then on, I had like people essentially looking out for me. I'd grown up with older people in my life, and I'd grown up loving to learn. So I've always been very good. Just like, I love to ask questions. I love to learn. I love to listen to stories. And so the people started taking care of me around these museums. And I went to the Brooklyn Public Library, and there were librarians who held books for me. They kept like recordings of Vincent Price reading Shakespearean sonnets. You know, they're like, I'd come in and there'd be something for me that librarians had put aside. And I went in every Saturday and often in other days. Same thing at the Brooklyn Museum. I'd be going and I'd stand in front of a painting for 20 minutes. I'd go to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was getting the best experiential education imaginable. I would go to Broadway shows and with my friend Howard Cohen and we'd do student rates, and sometimes we would go in at intermission. And it's really an amazing exercise. I have to tell you this. It's an amazing exercise because you have to construct the first act simply from the shadow of what you're watching. It's really quite remarkable. But what it was like I was developing my passion. I was developing my experience. And I gradually gained an appreciation of all of these arts. And so my love of the arts quickened by exposure and familiarity, also associated with a sense of freedom for me. But there's something else. I think of arts as like being able to take you to the next level. And for me, again, we're back to the imagination. At the time, by the way, the 70s and 80s, New York was regarded as like Sodom and Gomorrah by many people. There was, AIDS and crack and crime, but it was also a hothouse, right, of creativity. Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring were making their names. Andy Warhol was king of the East Village. DJ Kool Herc, born Clive Campbell in Kingston, had imported the practices that were commonplace in Jamaica during the late 50s into the 60s into New York, into the Bronx. He set up speakers, he mixed records, and he toasted and chanted, or what we today call rap, over the over the sounds. So today, we call him the founder of hip hop. New York was that place, that hothouse, that crucible. And in all that mess and all that confusion, there was great art being made. Those are the days for me, though, also of incredible naivete. And I'll give you one example. I remember it so clearly. I was walking, I must have been 13 or 14, walking down Flatbush Avenue. And a guy came up to me and asked me to help him carry something for what must have been about 3 blocks. Sure. It was a rolled up Persian rug. I'm happy to help. I carried it for him up to Prospect Place by the train station. And as soon as we got to the train near the subway, he grabbed it and dashed into the subway. And it was only later that I realized that I was a part of a crime. It was only later. And, there are stories like that threaded through all of New York, and it's really, really amazing to me because I escaped so much of that, even though I was doing stuff. And today I'm sometimes a little clueless. And whenever I get to, I want to blame my parents, I can't blame them. But, for keeping us locked away so that we are socialized to appreciate culture, but sometimes not all the nuances of everything that's going on. Anyway, after Mr. Bloomfield made his suggestions about becoming a critic, it didn't register deeply, and my parents still had law school in mind for me. And the truth be told, I thought it would have been really good to have Esquire behind my name. Esquire. just as an aside for a second, you meet people throughout the Caribbean, people without indoor plumbing or running water, and they'll tell you, by the way, my kid is going to Oxford or Cambridge. And many of them will make it because there's a great value for education and a great determination there. So the seed that Mr. Bloomfield had planted grew gradually. I'd heard about the top American schools, but I didn't know people at them. And my luck, I knew one person at Yale, Mitty Owens, the son of a congressman who had lived down the block on the same street where I lived, Prospect Place in Brooklyn, was 3 years ahead of me. He had gone also to John Dewey High School and had hosted high school tours of the Yale campus. So I'd gone up one weekend and I stayed there. And Mitty reminded me recently that I said something like, "Oh, I'm coming here." He asked, "Did you get accepted?" "No." "Have you applied?" "No." what he saw though as perhaps overconfidence or maybe arrogance was not that at all. I was doing what I do sometimes, which is thinking out loud. Anyway, I applied to 6 schools for college. My 2 safeties were Columbia and NYU. Again, I'm an idiot sometimes, and I don't know. I applied also to the University of Virginia, and which was then my first choice. But after I visited the campus, a beautiful campus, mind you, I heard them talking about Mr. Jefferson in the present tense, and I was a little too spooked by that. Yale turned out to be perfect for me. That's not to say it was easy, but again, I did not know my limitations. My wife likes to say that because I'm sometimes naive, I'm sometimes book smart, but life naive. And anyway, I threw myself into my passions. At Dewey, I'd edited the school's literary journal called Streams and Conscious. I also wrote for the school paper called The Vanguard at Yale. I was the founding editor of the Yale Observer, a newspaper, a weekly newspaper. I'd also written for the Yale Daily News. I founded the Caribbean Club. And probably my second day in campus, after studying the Yale Bulletin, which is thick, all the courses, I came up with Michael Cook, a professor who taught Commonwealth literature. And from his background that I read, he sounded like someone I would like to call. So I called him up. And I have to tell you another aside. In the Caribbean, if someone says you're bright, it could mean that you're wonderfully intelligent, or it could mean that you don't know your place, right? It's like both of those. So in recounting this story, I realized that he was probably thinking, but you're bright, Dean? I called him up. He was in disbelief. My second day on campus. It's like, who's this guy? And I'm like, I read this. He took a meeting with me, and he became one of my mentors. He was an English professor. I took his class. Brilliant man. He had us over all the time to his house in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. That's where I first ate quiche Lorraine, which is his favorite. To this day, I love quiche. And every time I make quiche or eat quiche, Michael Cook comes up to me. But it's also a place, and this is important for me to mention, the reason a place like Yale bonds people to it is that you get exposure to so much. And so this was my experience. I was able to take classes with some of the foremost minds imaginable. And recently, one of those people died. She was Professor Gloria Watkins to me. She was bell hooks to everyone else, you know. Another one of those, Robert Farris Thompson, was also there. Vincent Scully. I mean, Harold Bloom was my thesis professor, advisor. I look on that and I'm just thrilled. My wife is a professor, and she's a great professor at Bethel University, Angela Shannon Preston. And she's great with her students. And whenever she's being kind to them and wonderful with them, I just love it, because that's the experience I have had. You know, I've had that experience with teachers. I've had that experience with at all levels, and it's made me who I am today. So I am at Yale. I took classes and all the things I thought I was interested in, and some things I didn't know about. And one thing that I loved was just this explosion of learning and knowledge. Importantly, though, I started taking classes in critical theory, because that's how you become a critic, right? Wrong. Critical theory is the study of ways of reading literature, and Yale was a hothouse of post-structuralism, up against the new historicism. I could name a lot of them: deconstruction, semiotics. So I studied a lot of that stuff, and later on, when I went out into the world, I had an editor, my first editor, Brian Hegelke, at New City in Chicago. He told me, Ro, you're not writing for those 3 other people. You want to write for everyone. And so to this day, I don't use any of those jargon terms from critical theory, but I use like some of the concept, which is gives you ways of reading text and reading, because you want to increase all your stakeholders. To get my first job, I harkened back to college. In college, I was a chaperone for journalists from the Times. Robin Toner is her name, and she covered the White House and the Reagan presidency. Well, when she came, I peppered her with questions. I do that a lot. And I asked her, how do you, I just want to do that. And she's like, well, go ahead and go out elsewhere and do it. And if you want to lateral back to the Times, you can, but there's no way to do it but to do it and to get better. Go elsewhere, make your mark, mess up if you have to. So to get my first job, I moved to Chicago after college. And I had a plan, which is I was going to temp. I knew I was pretty good with the computer, and I knew a lot of computer language. And I was going to temp, and then I was going to write at night. Those are the days when I could do lots of all-nighters back to back, and then use the clips from the small newspaper, New City, to go to the Tribune. I did it. I did it exactly as planned. I wrote like 6 cover stories in 6 months and used those. So by 1990, I was writing for a year out of college. I was writing for the Tribune and for New City. And I passed myself off as an art critic. I don't know how. I knew a lot about the arts, and I knew how to write, and I knew how to sort of center the moment and the experience. But I didn't have the depth of knowledge like a Richard Christensen who'd been doing it for 50 years. And when you read critics like Pauline Kael, and you read just all the great critics, Walter Kerr, you don't think necessarily, oh, they started somewhere too. But they did. And so what I did for my own thing, I just started doing the work, and I covered up my insecurity with a lot of, I have a formidable vocabulary. I do. I studied the dictionary. That's my dad. I studied the dictionary. And so I have a really good vocabulary. I love language. And I love how words are put together. I love Latin. I love Greek. I love to take words apart. I love Indo-European and to find connections, And I talk about this later in my, well, I'll jump in. Language it's just so amazing to me because you can do so much with it. And the English language in particular is America, right? It has all the ideals of America, which is it accepts all comers. The language is made up of words from everywhere. When I was in high school, I studied Japanese for 2 years. And there are 3 alphabets in Japanese: the hiragana, katakana, and the kanji. And one is from the Chinese, one is indigenous Japanese, and katakana is for words that are foreign words like computer or stock market, and stuff like that. So that's not a language that accepts all comers. English is the American ideal, and it's a mercantile language. And so you have, from the Caribbean, you have tobacco, right? You have potato, and you have French words, and you have words that may come out of, Bantu, and words that come out of Latin. And so I love this stuff. I get lost in it easily. Sorry, I do. But it's a part of the learning. So for me, college was a place where I started to get into what it would be. And then when I was in the world, I was using that knowledge and that experience to almost cover up to a degree, but also to get me into other places and to learn more. I used advice from clips, and I got the Chicago Tribune. I got used Chicago Tribune clips to get to the New York Times. And in the Chicago, I worked at Times for, I think it's about 5 years as a stringer, national news stringer. And in the Chicago Times Bureau, my boss was a writer named Isabel Wilkerson. And I learned a lot from her, which is you do the research and you go deep. Her first book, The Warmth of Other Suns, I think she interviewed like 1,500 people in order to get to 3 or 4 to tell their stories in that book. That's a lot of interviews, and there's not that appetite or capacity in a lot of places to accept that. But that patience paid off. It's a brilliant book, and her work and her work ethic left a great impression on me. We came to the Twin Cities. I never imagined being here. I'm on staff at the Chicago Tribune. And I get a call, come on up for a weekend. And I did, and it was wonderful. I mean, it's like a secret. It's super cold. It was a secret, but we were open to moving because we had just become parents, and we were planning for our child's education. And one of the things that I found out in reporting, I did hard news reporting for the New York Times in the daytime and arts reporting in the Chicago Tribune at night, covering shows. In the hard news reporting, one of the things we found out is that there are young people on the west side of Chicago who had never gone to the south side, young people on the south side of Chicago had never been to downtown, and so on and so forth, because it was a very clan-based system there. And even though I know our child would have to go everywhere, right, and not have that sense of limitation, that was just frightening to us. So we were amenable to moving. And so when we came up here, we were blown away, and we still are. This is an amazing community. It still has challenges, deep challenges, but it has potential and possibilities. And we have raised our children here. It's where I've lived longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. And we're still champions and still hopefully very much contributors as well. Theater founder Tyrone Guthrie liked to tell his actors, "Astonish me in the morning." I take that not as a command, but as a wish to be transported. It's my hope when I go to the theater or into any artist's work or experience to be taken away. Calgon, take me away. For everything comes down to story, and arts and artifacts are almost all about telling our stories. I would argue stories that make us uniquely human. Ask someone who they are, and they'll tell you a story. How was your day? You're going to get a story. All of that led to me wanting to be a writer. Dorothy Parker, the critic and poet and great wit, liked to give this advice to people thinking about a career in the literary arts. If you have young friends who aspire to become writers, she said, the second greatest favor you can do them is to present them with a copy of Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. But the first favor you can do them is to shoot them now while they're happy. I love her wit. I'm thankful though for all my teachers and for all the people who have poured into me. I know that the work has to be done and has to be a struggle sometimes and to make it worthwhile, but it's so worth it. Our nation is a pointillist painting. It has infinite dots, and they reach out in every direction. They're a mosaic of cut and torn fabric. They're a mosaic of colors, and all of that is under threat. Yet we remain the dreams of our ancestors, the strokes and lights of Faith Ringgold and Bisa Butler and Kahinda Wiley. We are made of stories, and those stories make us. As a young person in New York, I used to read opera critic Manuela Holteroff in the Wall Street Journal. She would be so scathing. I remember in one review how she described an old Italian tenor as coming on stage looking like a faded head of lettuce. In the middle, she talked about him being tossed this way and that, and at the very end, he was chopped salad. So I read that stuff and loved it. I did, because it's like being at the scene of an accident, right? You know, it's like, what happened here, and how do you figure it out? The challenge for me though is like, I was never that type of person. Like, I didn't have that kind of barbed thing about my wit, you know, and I loved puns more than anything else. I loved reading people who can write with an X-Acto knife, but I'm made differently. And I'm made probably from a little too much kindness and love. My sense of what's witty does not involve ad hominem attacks. I hope that I don't use cheap put downs. Like Dorothy Parker said again, there's a hell of a distance between wisecracking and wit. Wit has truth in it. Wisecracking is simply calisthenics with words. Not that I dislike calisthenics with words. But I love puns, and I remember the first time I heard the expression, I would challenge you to a battle of wits, but I see that you're unarmed. I'm like, wow, you know? And by the way, that expression has been attributed to Shakespeare and to Oscar Wilde and to Mark Twain and to Winston Churchill. But the real person who may have written it is a woman, and her name, she wrote it in the novel Remy or the Blue, the Boy in Blue, and her name, I'm sorry, I can't read my own writing here. Did I take her name out? Oh my God, this is embarrassing. This is she wrote it in 1866. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Abby Buchanan Longstreet. So they gave all her good stuff to the boys. Before I wrap up though, I just want to talk a little and take some questions. I want to talk a little bit more about language, because it's one of my earliest loves, and it's a thing that's influenced me so much. I must have been 4 or 5 when my grandfather, Papa, was outside in the back, and he was working, and he'd stopped for a little bit, and he had bitten into the flesh of a ripe mango. Now, I love mangoes, and I don't remember which type it was that he was eating. It could have been a number 11 or a Julie or an East Indian. I'm a connoisseur of mangoes. And he just marveled at it. And he goes, this can make man go, right? So I'm like 4 or 5. And I'm just like, whoa. I mean, because it's a pun. You know, and it's just like, it blew my mind. Like, you could take the word apart, and then maybe there's sweetness in it the same way you take a mango apart, you know? It was just amazing. And from then on, I think, that's my earliest memory of a pun, and I cannot stop them. I cannot stop reading them. I cannot stop loving them. So I've loved language ever since. And I love language because it allows us to get into who we are. And so language, gesture, theater, all of these are about telling stories and getting us to a place where we, all of us, can share and touch each other and find out more about who we are together, individually and together. So with that, I thank you very much. and I will take a few questions. Thank you. And by the way, before I jump into that, I did have some images to show you. I have a Facebook friend named Sam Grabarski, and my birthday is on Christmas. Every year he makes these images of me, these memes, these cartoons for my birthday, and I love him for it because they are just the silliest things you could imagine. Well, I love words and I use a lot of vocabulary. So I think this was last year. Yeah, October 21st, 2020. Merriam-Webster used one of my sentences for a citation for the word gutter snipe. And I'm like, am I dead? Am I floating? What is this? You know, it's just like, it's such a dream. I mean, I literally had tyrannical parents who made me study the dictionary as a child, and it helped me. I did well on my tests and blah blah blah, and I love it. So, but I was in the dictionary. So that's everything to me. So I have that's my little celebration here. So, but I will take your questions and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. What a fun morning. I thought that there couldn't be a greater honor than serving on the Pulitzer Prize Committee, but I have to say, to be associated with gutter snipe has to be right up there too. That is one of the best words. The Pulitzer Prize Committee, if there's anything you could tell us about serving for them and the choice, and in particular, when you are looking, I'm not sure if you did it for criticism or plays or
Drama.
For drama. So when you do the serve for drama, are you looking at it specifically as literature, or do you also incorporate how it was interpreted on the stage? But just general thoughts on the Pulitzer and then that particular question.
Thank you. That's a great question. And so I've served on the Pulitzer jury twice, and I don't know how it works. I don't know how I was selected. They just asked me, and I'm happy to. You get like over 100 plays that you read, and so that's really wonderful. You cover the waterfront of theater for a year. Ideally, you would have seen most of those shows, but there's no way you could have seen all of those. So what I did with that, so what happens is like you read ahead of time, and then you fly into New York for the weekend to deliberate with your fellow jurors. And usually I think there are 4 or 5 of us. And you go through and sort of you come in with work that's impressed you or work that's like blown you away, and often that's, for me, it's language and structure, and so I'm reading it as literature, but I also want it to be performed. I mean, I want it to be 3-dimensional. I mean, because you could, I'm a sucker. I could get lost in words. I can do that, but you want the whole experience to capture an audience. So you're reading for the thing that astonishes you, the thing that makes you go wow. And so we had 1 year. I had one script that I championed that won. And then the year that we, 1 year that we recommended 3 plays, the board rejected our recommendation. So the Pulitzer is sometimes they'll leave a category blank. I don't know if I explain this. The way it works is that the jury recommends like 3 plays or 3 works that they think are worthy. And then the Pulitzer board, a bigger board, looks at them. So what we're doing is we're culling and narrowing down. So the 3 that we present are finalists. And then they choose from those. So that's a process, and it's really quite an honor. Tremendous amount of beautiful work. You get to see the whole landscape, and you also get to meet your fellow jurors. Usually one is a playwright, and usually one is a professor, and then a couple of critics, or sometimes 3 critics. And then we just like sort of meet there in a really pure space, and it could be contentious, but we're arguing about ideas, and really in a way arguing about the nature of the country, what gets prioritized, what we celebrate, what we show to the world. Hope that helps. Thank you. Yes, okay. Okay, so the question is, am I playing Wordle? The short answer is no, I play Scrabble. Yeah, I play Scrabble, and I think I can only manage one addiction. So the other question that she asked was just about talking about the scene where we are now. The theater community here is very resilient, but it is hurting like everyone else. I mean, this has been a devastating development for all of us. And if there's any kind of thing that's come out of it, is that all of us now know what it is like to be an artist, a theater artist, because we've had to pivot, we have had to stop, we've had to start. We don't know, are we going, are we coming? We don't know, and we've had to be super careful. And the artists live this kind of life all the time. And all of us now have had some of that. I do believe, I mean, I'm not a public health expert, but I do believe that we are on the cusp of something. And I hope, because Omicron has been so widespread, and then between that and vaccinations, that we are coming out of it. And who knows, hopefully we'll have a great spring, great summer. I hope it doesn't come back like the flu does in the winter, but who knows what will happen. I'm not sure, but I'm very, very optimistic. I'm very thankful about where we are now. And I'm concerned about young people, especially who, who've been disrupted in really crazy ways. And we see some of it. I mean, I have to tell you, it's like I'm driving on the street, driving on the highway, someone will cut me off or whatever. I have almost all the grace in the world, I wish you well, it's like, I don't have any of the knee-jerk stuff I would have in the past. Like, we need that. I mean, people are on edge. We are stressed, and I read the news. I live in the news world like you do, and you see just all the eruptions of insanity. And I understand some of it because it's such a challenging time. But I do believe that we're resilient. Many years ago, I'm jumping around here, I was asked to like if I would try to apply for a job to head an organization. And I said, well, what do I know about leadership? Nothing, although I probably know more than I do. But I studied my wife's father. My father-in-law was the retired president of a university, Fisk University, and he had taken the Harvard New President's course. So he sent me some of his books. I read those books, and one of them is a management book called Reframing Organizations. Now, I had to read it many times because it was fairly dry, but it was so good because it says that any challenge that you have, you can solve. You just have to put the right frame on it. it's quintessentially American. And I think in this moment, I feel that way. I feel that we're going to be resilient, that we're going to come out of it with a lot of new learnings and a lot of growth. And I hope that we carry that and stick to that and carry the hope as well. You know, it's really, really a challenging time. So I know that you had a question.
Yes, you said that you made the choice to move here to Minneapolis because you were going to become parents and you wanted to raise your kids in this sort of atmosphere. And I'm wondering how Minneapolis has met your expectations and in what ways has it perhaps not?
That's a tough question. Well, let me just say it this way. We have been so blessed. We have been blessed beyond measure. One of the things when I moved from New York to Chicago, I spent the first year and a half. I was in Chicago for 9 years. I spent the first year and a half comparing New York to Chicago. That's nonsense, right? I'm not in New York and I'm not present for Chicago. So when I moved here, I decided I'm not repeating that. I've learned something. And so I came here as like, what is here? I'm not going to be comparing it to what I may be missing or what I think should be here based on my love of New York or my love of Chicago food, you know, deep dish pizza, you know, what is here? And so you appreciate gefilte fish, you know, or whatever it is, you know. You love walleye. We make a lot of walleye, you know. You appreciate whatever it is where you are. The poet Gwendolyn Brooks liked to say, you bloom where you're planted, right? And so that's what I did. So we have had a really really good educational experience here. My daughters, we were in Golden Valley first for 15 years, and then we've been in Eden Prairie for the last 4 years. And so our kids, that's their experience. And they went to the Hopkins School, and the last one went to the Eden Prairie High School. So it's been a very good educational experience. It's been, if you're an adolescent, it's your adolescence is going to be tumultuous. That's just the nature of it, you know, and so you're going to have challenges, growth challenges. I told my daughter, who's now a freshman at McAllister, I said to her, we're empty nesters, so she's the last of two. I said to her in high school, she was going through some stuff. I was like, hey, you don't want to peak here, babe. You don't want to peak. I write about all those characters. That's all Tennessee Williams writes about, right? These students who peaked, these people who peaked in high school, and they're now looking back on that. No, you want to be a lifelong learner. You want this trajectory. You want to do that. And she's like, well, no, leave that social stuff alone. Let that go. And she listened. It's hard, you know, because I was basically channeling my parents. That's what they said to me. And I was, you know, I regarded my parents as people who kept people prisoner, you know, so, but I'm very thankful. So what I'm saying is that it's been a good education all around, and I considered all of that. And I consider the pandemic too. I mean, this experience is a part, there's learning in it. And we have to learn to find ways to turn poison into medicine, to find ways to turn hardship into sort of transcendence, you know, so. Yes, okay, she's coming.
I have a question about the basic mechanics of being a theater critic.
I love that.
Do you watch the play? Do you take notes? I'm very interested in how that all works.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that. Well, let me just say this. So you take notes in the dark, and guess what? You're writing to your brain. You're not writing on, you know, it's like on the pad, but you do remember it, right? You know, I remember some years ago, I interviewed the playwright August Wilson, and what was interesting about August Wilson is that he had a ton of ideas, and his first director, Lloyd Richards, would just say, you have three, just find three great pillars and anchor everything to those. And that's the structure of your play. So when I'm writing in the dark, I'm taking notes, but really I want to be, what are the things that astonish me? What are the things that carry me away? What are the things that are fetching? And I sort of want to note those things. I want to know nuances. When I first started, I would take a ton of notes, and I still write notes today, but I know this stuff now. And I know it in a way, I'm familiar with it in a way about how to do it, what I'm looking for, what's surprising, what's fascinating, what's interesting, what's resonant, and that I'm seeing those things. And I can see them, and I don't have to take notes. I do take notes, but I don't have to write them down, or I don't have to be able to read my notes. I hope that makes sense. Okay, yes.
First of all, just thank you. This has been so delightful. I'm always curious with people who have an identity, I think this might be right, in artistic work, the shift from, I know I'm good at writing, to I'm a writer. And I wonder if you have a specific moment when that became clear, or was it a gradual, or that may not be how you think about yourself, but I'm just curious how you came to be, how you think about yourself as a creative person.
Well, I thank you so much. And I should tell you this, you've asked me one of my questions that I asked all the people I interview, which is like, basically, what's your eureka moment? And for me, it's all been a gradual plane. I mentioned my teacher making a statement about how you become a critic. I mentioned this and that, but all of it has been kind of a slow awakening. And some of it for me also has been because I even though I get raptured in an idea, sometimes I'm slow to recognize something. So, but it's a great question, and it's one that we all ask. How much more? One more. Okay. One last one? Okay.
Thank you very much, Ron. I want to say one thing, your mention of being in the present and being present for the place you're in, and it reminds me of something that Susan Laurie Parks, great author, person, playwright, wrote when regarding people who come to the theater or didn't, when asked about the frustration of no one coming to a certain show, she said, no, I'm excited for the people who are there. And I just want to say your poem about your grandfather was just so striking, so beautiful. Who are some poets that are inspiring to you currently? You don't want to start.
I love poetry. I love language. I read everything, and we are friends with Rita Dove and Yusef Komuniaka. We're, Sharon Olds was the person who gave me her, I got her book when I won that award back in 1984, The Living and the Dead. I've had, you don't want to start. We love poets. We love poetry. We love writers. We love playwrights. And by the way, I should introduce this Christina Baldwin, who just asked the question. She's the artistic director of the Jungle Theater and a fabulous leader here in town. And we live in a community of such great people and such great resources. So I don't want to turn it back on you, but but thank you, and I get to live here and to work here with some amazing artists. And I feel humble. A follow-up to your question and to a question that was asked earlier is because I don't necessarily think of myself, when you ask someone about what is a critic, they'll tell you, the ordinary person will tell you that someone who finds fault. And that's not criticism, that's fault finding. And a critic is someone who appreciates the work. And by appreciating the work, we're talking about structure, we're talking about the resonances, we're talking about aesthetics. We're talking about meaning. We're talking about social context. We're talking about all of it. And I'm really, really thankful. I see. So I have a question for you. It's a favor. I initially was going to end this talk with a poem that I wrote. It's an actual letter I wrote to my grandmother. And I didn't because I left my book at home, but my wife went home and got my book. And so, so I may read that if you don't mind. And this is when I shared this, this was an actual letter I wrote to my great grandmother, and it's called Letter from Foreign. And when I first shared it, I shared it with Angela. She's like, "Oh, that's a poem." I didn't think it was a poem, but it's in this book. I back in 1992, I wrote a book called Dreams in Soy Sauce, and it's about dreams I had after eating some Chinese food. And so now I'm going to share the poem. But I just want to explain a little bit about her. When I was a kid, I had to deal with my grandmother that I always had to tell her the truth. I wouldn't be punished if I did something bad, but I had to tell her the truth. So I learned to tell the truth and have it not be a weapon, and also try to be honest all the time. And so I wrote her this letter when I came here to tell her about America, where her husband had been, and now her great-grandson had been, but she had never been. And we called her Mom. Her name was Gladys Elizabeth Campbell Holmes. Dear Mom, there are so many things I have to tell you about America, the place where you said the streets are gold, and there are many people with good hair, like those in the movies. I gotta tell you, this is honest now. Remember when I used to play with that toy helicopter and fly away a foreign? Well, Mom, there's Grandmama. I have some news for you. America is not in the sky like the planes, but it's on land, flat land, droopy cornfields, choking chimneys with latrines and doo-doo and frozen ragamuffins as good as dead on the sidewalks. Mom, you tell me, say, God bless America, for the people here are good. I have some more news for you. Sure, some people go to church and chapel, mosque and synagogue, some march and pray, and some smile when they see you on the street. Some don't say, morning dog, and sometimes across the street when we pass them, for a healthy black man is a dinosaur blowing fire at the people with pretty hair. And you know how easy it is for hair to catch fire? Mom, you tell me that they have scholarships galore, and they're true. But you never think about glass, about aquarium, and how buckra can encase you, so no matter how much you scream, no matter how much you bark, the snake's still there. Well, I don't want to bring down God on me. So I must say that education here, good. We learn all kinds of things about Greece and Rome. We speak Italian now, some French, even Japanese. All these things that you wanted me to do, Mom. But there's lots of glass about. Lenses, ceilings, bottles, and they're all trained on me, you know, reflecting, watching, waiting, and laughing. But I have to follow your lead. Almost a century, she was almost 100 years old, and still not weary yet. I must never get weary yet. Thank you, guys. Thank you.